Hello, it's me, Darkfry, the Supreme Gamer. As the king of gamers, I love me a difficult video game from time to time. I also love participating in gamer discourse. If you've been on the gamer internet for more than 5 minutes, you have heard the Dark Souls and difficulty options discourse. This topic is of great interest to me, and as soon as I started this channel, I knew I'd want to make a video on it. What a fool I was! The topic of difficulty is a rabbit hole, and a fascinating one. Look at the length of this video. I will barely be scratching the surface. Since this video is a long boy, let's go through what we'll cover. I want this video to be so clear that a bird will fly into it and break its neck. I will attempt to answer 2 questions to the best of my ability. 1. Can Dark Souls have an easier difficulty and implement it well? And 2. Should Dark Souls have difficulty options? I thought answering these questions would be easy. No. To answer them, we will have to discuss several more topics. The purpose of difficulty options, the role of difficulty in both game design and accessibility. We'll design an easy mode for Dark Souls, that'll be fun. Kings, queens, and emperors, this is definitely the hardest video I've made so far. I guess you could call it the Dark Souls of Darkfry videos. Okay, so first things first. I will be saying the words difficulty and accessibility a lot in this video. These words have different implicit meanings in pretty much any sentence they're spoken in. So let's take a moment to define them so we know what the heck I mean in the 99 and 33 times I say them. Spared you the trouble of counting. So what even is difficulty? Defining difficulty is, fittingly, a difficult thing to do. Luckily, people much smarter than me already gave it a go, so I'll be using those. Specifically, I'll be using the definitions listed in Patrick Jagoda's paper titled On Difficulty in Video Games. How convenient. There are 3 main types of difficulty: interpretive, affective, and mechanical. Interpretive difficulty has to do with translating potentially abstract themes in any work of art. It's what we mean when we call a book or poem difficult. Affective difficulty, true to its name, has to do with how games affect you emotionally, mentally. It's fairly obvious that some games are more demanding than others on that front. Affective difficulty will be important in what we'll be discussing here, but it's also freaking bonkers and will definitely be the subject of a separate video soon. What concerns us most today is mechanical difficulty. This one's important because it's the type that is truly and wholly unique to games. It's the mechanical skill and knowledge they demand from the player. It's what people typically mean when they say that a game is difficult, and it's the most relevant and common definition to gaming. Okay, so we define difficulty. Too bad that defining accessibility is even harder. Trying to arrive at a perfectly concise and concrete definition is impossible, so we're gonna have to be a bit general in our terms here. Accessibility can be thought of as giving as many players as possible the best opportunity possible of having a complete and comfortable experience with a game. To achieve this, developers implement a variety of completely optional settings and features in their games. These, of course, are what we call accessibility features. Important thing to note first, there are many categories of disability and a lot of nuances to this topic that I can't really bring, despite me myself having a disability. Concerning their lived experiences and desired accessibility features, listen to people with disabilities. So, how do difficulty and accessibility connect? You might have heard a statement to the effect of, "This game is so accessible, it's very easy to pick up and play." That has to do with difficulty, both mechanical and affective. how some games ease you in or aren't very challenging at all, or are generally friendly towards the player. It's a common understanding of what accessible means, but for our purposes here, it's just one part of our definition of accessibility. It would be incredibly reductive to say that a less difficult game is also more accessible, but technically not wrong. Difficulty is inextricably linked with accessibility. So, where difficulty is an issue, naturally there are accessibility options to address it. That's right, folks. Difficulty options. So is difficulty important? Yes. Duh. The significance of difficulty in games is self-explanatory. It's one of the core building blocks and characteristics of any game's design. So much so that sometimes difficulty is what defines it. Difficulty creates friction between the game and the player. And it's that friction that forces the player to engage with the game mechanics and have fun with them the way they were designed to. You might have seen this graph before that explains the flow state. It's when the player is sufficiently challenged according to their progressing skill level, and it's what most games want to achieve with their difficulty progression. I know difficulty is important, you know difficulty is important, you know who else knows it? Society. Hey, did you know that in New York and various other US cities, pinball was banned for over 30 years? Okay, I know this is a bit of a jump, but bear with me. In the early 1940s, pinball was outright outlawed in the Big Apple, and the ban wasn't lifted until the mid-1970s. It was one of the original moral panics, before comic books, before Dungeons & Dragons, before video games. Pinball was considered a frivolous hobby at best, and exploitative gambling at worst. Friend of the channel Arcadeology made an excellent documentary about this pinball panic that you should watch if this sounds interesting to you. Link in the description. The panic faded thankfully, and the ban was lifted. Why exactly was the ban lifted though? Well, it started with a demonstration that pinball is actually a game of skill, not a game of chance. Pinball becoming socially acceptable depended on it requiring mechanical skill. Society respects mechanically difficult games. And that makes sense. Skillful play is impressive, fun to watch, and profitable. That's why sports, esports, and speedrunning exist. Point is, difficulty has a social significance too, and it's one we tend not to think about a whole lot, but is very influential in how games are made. Even when difficulty modes are included, there's a bias towards them raising the difficulty rather than lowering it. The reason difficulty is a very contentious topic is that it is one of the few, if not the only, accessibility feature that also heavily affects any game's overall design, and also the player's own tastes. Some players like hard games, and others prefer easy ones. Difficulty is one of the biggest indicators of a game's target audience. This idea that difficulty options are an accessibility feature is something that we'll return to later in this video, so put a pin on it. Pacing scripts is fun! For now, let's look at the game design side of the issue. What does it mean to implement a difficulty option well? To understand that, we will have to take a look at the concept of intended play. Simply put, game designers have creative visions. Some might even say something as bold as, video games are art. Sometimes, creators want their work to be experienced in a specific way. They have something they want to communicate, something they want to achieve with it. Their art has a goal. Sometimes that goal is as simple as, I just want people to have fun with my game. And as long as they enjoy playing it, I don't care how they do it. Which is quite frankly some monarch shit right there. Sometimes it's more complicated though. Games can be vehicles to infinite artistic expression. It might be the most limitless medium out there now. The biggest limit, ironically, is the player themselves. When watching a movie, you have no say on how the story progresses or any of the characters' actions. Games are different in this sense. The player does have control over the progression of the game, while the creators of the game have very limited control over the player. For games with specific artistic endeavors, things get pretty complicated because there's a middleman between the designer and the goal. For these games, the designers face a conundrum. Just how much control should the player have over their experience? Of course, there is no concrete answer to this, and it varies from game to game, but it is a very important decision for the designers to make. Difficulty is often woven into a game's narrative, so of course the designers face the same dilemma. There's two extremes to this. You can give the player a lot of control, with varied difficulty options, or no control, with a set-in-stone difficulty option the player cannot tamper with. The former seems to be the more popular option, both among game devs and players. It does have its fair share of risks though. Often a game is designed with one difficulty in mind, the one conventionally called normal. A game with multiple difficulties must be fun in all of them. There are many games that only feel well designed if played on their intended difficulty, making the other difficulties feel like more of an afterthought included only out of necessity to comply with conventional difficulty options. Metroid Prime 3 on hard mode becomes a chore akin to doing your taxes, since its idea of difficulty is giving every boss an obscene health pool, leaving you in battles that aren't more challenging, but just longer, with fuckers like this one that just won't die! If you ask me, which, you know, my video and all, if a difficulty option isn't implemented well, then it might as well not be there. For one such option to be well implemented, it must either fulfill the game's intended goal, or change that goal in a meaningful way. One of my favorite examples of this is Persona 5 Strikers. After you beat the game, you unlock Merciless Difficulty. Merciless Difficulty is a baffling difficulty mode where fun goes to die. To give you an idea, even the Pixie, the weakest enemy in the game, can one-shot you, and you fight like 100 of these things in the tutorial battle. Playing Strikers on Merciless sucks. Until it totally rules. Strikers is a Muso game, meaning the entire appeal of it is mowing down dozens of enemies with a single button press. It's just a fun romp. Well, Merciless turns the table so hard, it does amazing front flips all the way to Australia. Here's the genius part though. Every single battle gives you a shit ton of money, experience, and rare items and equipment. Every battle is super tough, but also super rewarding. It makes my gamer brain very happy, and after a while, using those rewards, you become so strong that the battles start getting really fun. That's what I mean by changing the goal in a meaningful way. Strikers on Merciless becomes an entirely distinct experience, adding to its replayability. This, finally, brings us to Dark Souls. Wait, we're how many minutes in? This video was a mistake. Speaking of mistakes, how do you go about adding a difficulty option to Dark Souls when the difficulty is a large part of the point and appeal of the game? Since difficulty is the very core of its design, If Dark Souls had 2 difficulty options, they would be 2 completely different video games. The bottom line is that to add another difficulty to Dark Souls, you have to redesign it. So let's do it! For starters, this isn't going to be so simple. When talking about difficulty, people seem to both overestimate its importance and underestimate just how much work goes into finding and achieving the desired difficulty. Balancing a game isn't easy, especially when it puts a lot of weight on its difficulty. So with that in mind, what are the main arguments against having difficulty options in this series? Adding an easy mode would ruin the entire point of these games. They are meant to be punishing, so it feels extra rewarding when you finally succeed. Adding an easy mode would diminish the feeling of despair and depression the bleak world of these games is supposed to convey to the player. The Souls games being easy would be peak ludonarrative dissonance. Adding an easy mode would go against the series' original goals and intentions. This is a bit similar to the first one, but subtly different. Adding an easy mode would completely change the identity of these games. It would go against their creators' intentions. If they want to make games that are harsh and inaccessible, that's valid and they should be able to do it. These are, to my understanding, the main arguments presented against having multiple difficulty options. They might seem similar, because they are. They all have to do with design philosophy. This thing is this way because of this reason. I won't actually be designing a concrete mode in this video. It will be more on the theoretical side. Basically, I'm just gonna be brainstorming a bunch, but I'll follow some rules. 1. The ideas will have to address the anti-easy mode arguments in some way, meaning they will have to serve an explicit purpose or goal, without changing the game's original intention. I won't take the most common route and just make enemies weaker or the player stronger. I'm looking for some more interesting or satisfying solutions. A combination of any number of these ideas can build a theoretical easy mode for these games. Typically, the more, the merrier. Let's also address the pachyderm in the room. There's an obvious solution here that a lot of famously punishing games use. Letting the player completely customize the difficulty at any time with sliders or an assist mode. Games like Pathologic 2 or Celeste do this, while telling you that they are intended to be very difficult. This is the middle ground of the 2 extremes I mentioned earlier of giving control to the player. The options are all there, and the possibilities could be endless. Most gamers know what they want, and they will find a way to play the game however they like, pretty much no matter what you do. Game designers need to trust the players more. If you give them the option, they will play the way they choose, make their own experience, and their own reward. They will literally do your job for you. It's an approach that I really like, and we'll talk about it more later. However, it doesn't work for the purposes of this video. It breaks rule number 1. Also, for a game like Dark Souls, it'd be a nightmare to implement. This series has a specific goal, one that's quite problematic. Here's Game Maker's Toolkit's Mark Brown explaining it very well.
Souls games use their extreme difficulty to create a really strong emotion of bleak, isolating hopelessness, which then, after some perseverance, translates into an equally strong emotion of triumphant reward, and this basically repeats for each area in the game. Unfortunately, some players aren't able to overcome that challenge, which means they only get hopelessness, never reward. So there's been requests for a completely optional mode that reduces the difficulty to something they still find challenging, but not impossible. However, this runs the risk of perfectly capable players using this mode, perhaps after a few boss fight rage quits, which would make the game too easy, and mean they neither feel hopelessness nor reward as they effortlessly saunter through the world.
We want to avoid precisely what Mark describes here. You can't really incentivize the player to learn the rules of the game and overcome the obstacles you present them with through trial, error, and perseverance if you also give them an alternate path of least resistance they can pick at any time. This is a simple fix in theory. We won't be altering what's already there. We are looking for an entirely separate mode that the player will have to choose and commit to when starting a new playthrough. For the purposes of this design exercise, I played through the entirety of Dark Souls 3 twice. I chose that game because that's the one I really like. On my second playthrough, I made Dark Souls 3 my bitch, using various cheats to forcibly create an easy mode for myself, and used my findings to come up with some ideas. So, how do we start? What would be the goal of our added easier difficulty? Well, what stands out about the Souls games besides their challenging gameplay? The world, of course. We want to encourage exploration of the world. The crushing difficulty isn't there to offer the satisfaction of a hard-earned victory, so we want to offer a different reward. This way we have two sides of the same coin. Present the player with this epic, awe-inspiring dark fantasy world, and ask them to either explore it to the heart's content, or overcome it against impossible odds. Especially with the addition of photo mode in the Demon's Souls remake, I know for a fact that there are many people out there who would find great joy in just cruising through the world and taking amazing pictures of the incredible vistas and landscapes these games offer. Just look at some of these locations. They are larger than life. They invoke a feeling of both wonder and intense fear. There's a word for that, I think. Starts with sub. Sublime. So what do we do? Different enemy placement. How do we handle the infamously punishing encounters of these games? I argue that simply making the enemies weaker is inadequate and unsatisfying. Our goal is to make Dark Souls easier, not easy. We must leave a healthy amount of challenge, make it a tad more forgiving while keeping it fun. Because I used the power of cheats to make my character smooth, the enemies of Dark Souls 3 were relatively much weaker than usual. Although I do admit that steamrolling through the enemies that gave me so much trouble in previous playthroughs put a big smile of pure sadistic satisfaction on my face, I wasn't making any meaningful decisions to determine how to handle each situation. The different combinations of enemies and obstacles they throw at you is a bigger contribution than each individual enemy's strength, and changing them can have some very interesting results. As an example, I'll use the first mob encounter from the Painted World of Ariandel DLC in Dark Souls 3. Starting from the beginning bonfire, you will probably just head straight. At one point, you will get a spear chucked at you by the first mob you see, as if he's saying, "Hey! Over here!" Once you get close, you will probably be spotted by the other enemies on the hill. There are 3 types of enemies in this encounter. Spear-wielding enemies that will throw their spears at you, of which there are 3. Torch-wielding enemies that swing their sword at you very fast and do fire AoE attacks, of which there are 3. And shield-wielding enemies that exist just to block your attacks and occasionally swing at you, of which there are 2. These enemies exist for a reason, and they complement each other's weaknesses. If you use your weapon to attack a torch or spear-wielding enemy, and there's a shield enemy nearby, your weapon will just bounce off the shield, rendering it useless. You have to either single out the shield enemies, or defeat them first. To defeat them, you have to wait for them to attack, dodge it, and then stab them from behind. However, doing that is very difficult if you have other enemies chucking spears at you, or doing a wide flamethrower attack that will hit you if you're close. This encounter can be very tough if you're not careful, It's very easy to end up with a nightmare mob that just will not leave you alone, attacks you mercilessly, and can't be touched because of the shield enemies. There are ways to approach it though. You can climb the hill from behind and backstab the shield enemies and take care of the torch and spear enemies quickly. You can use magic attacks if you're a wizard, or my personal favorite approach, just ignore them. Every piece of this encounter has purpose, and contributes to the challenge meaningfully. If you remove or change one of them, the effect will be very noticeable. Remove the shields, and now you can get through the encounter just by flailing your weapon like a maniac. Remove the spears, and now singling out the shields is a walk in the park. Remove the torches, and now the spears are easily approachable and disposed of. The key isn't to remove the pieces, but to rearrange them. The challenge of this encounter is very meticulously designed, and we can use that same design philosophy it uses to create an encounter that accomplishes the same thing, but is slightly easier. What I would do in this situation, for example, is put one shield and torch at the base of the hill, and 2 spears on the top of the hill. This has the same philosophy as the original encounter, but is an easier version. The idea is that if you take the path, you will have to deal with the torch and shield enemies, while spears are thrown at you. The challenge is trying to single out the shield and then take out the torch while avoiding the spears. Once again, you have many options on how to approach. You can climb the hill from behind to backstab the spears, use magic, or ignore them! This applies to pretty much every mob encounter in the game. The enemies are positioned in a specific way for a specific purpose, and you can redesign the encounters to fulfill the same purpose, but provide a more forgiving challenge. This approach to enemies has a few advantages. It can be a really useful learning tool for many players that prefer learning the enemy patterns at their own pace. They can have whatever level of challenge they like, which can be very rewarding by itself. Many of them could also feel comfortable enough by the end that they could try taking on the much tougher challenge of the base game and
suffer as originally intended.
Add a master key item. You know those shortcuts that let you traverse the area easily after you've already cleared it, so that you can reach the area boss fight easier? When you come across them for the first time, they are of course locked. So here's an idea. At the start of the game, you can choose a certain limited number, let's say for example 3, of master keys, which can bypass these locks and allow you to skip areas if you want. This could lead to some really interesting results. You can use this to get to any area you want super quickly. You can explore the areas you want, experiment with builds, learn the layout of the world, and so much more. It will also create a new speedrunning category, which is always super hype. This facilitates exploration, but with a hard limit so that it doesn't eliminate it instead. So, how do these changes so far affect the world of Soulsborne? A lot! The difficulty of these games defines your relationship with their worlds, the way you interact with and perceive them. You live in this world and are forced to deal with all its horrors. Giving the player control over the world turns this around. Instead of being at its mercy, the world is now your bitch, and you can do whatever the hell you want. With some limits, of course. It's an entirely different kind of appeal than what these games currently offer, and would be an interesting approach to the easy mode. It'd be a lot of fun if executed well. It's also, remember, an entirely separate mode. It doesn't change the base game's intentions, just adds to them. We're taking the Persona 5 Strikers approach. By the way, on my cheated playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I noticed that one of the codes I could activate made it so that no enemy spawned. And out of curiosity, I did it. I was playing Dark Souls 3 without any enemies or anything to hinder me. The effects were interesting. This code turned Dark Souls 3 into an existential nightmare. An empty, desolate world, even more lifeless than before, you wander in complete isolation, lacking any semblance of purpose. It creates a disturbing peace, one that only exists because nothing else does. And do you see what I meant when I said difficulty design is a rabbit hole? And we're not even done yet. The third idea is one that, even if implemented by itself, could create a decent, easier difficulty. And I'll just be honest, I am just going to straight up steal it from another game that already does it. Hades God Mode. So yeah, there's this little underground indie game called Hades. It's pretty good, cool gameplay, cool characters, cool story. Good game in general, guys. I think it's gonna be pretty successful. So Hades, in its infinite wisdom, has something called God Mode. What this mode does is simple. It makes you take 20% less damage, and every time you die with it activated, that damage reduction increases by 2%, up to a max of 80%. Something similar to Hades God Mode can be very easily applied to a game like Dark Souls. Every time you respawn, you take a little bit less damage. This option, by itself, could make for a simple but effective approach for an easy mode. It's quite ingenious. It rewards sheer trial and error, something that you absolutely have to endure when playing a Souls game. That little bit of extra damage reduction might give you the incentive to persevere and try one more time, when otherwise you might have stopped playing indefinitely. Of course, it would need some tweaking. What I would suggest is having it start at 10% up to a max of 40%, so a little less than half damage from every hit at maximum, and have it reset to 10% after defeating a boss fight. That way the player wouldn't reach the maximum too early, and it would act as a small encouragement to try again for each boss fight. I hope that I managed to prove so far that the answer to the question, can Dark Souls have a well-implemented easy mode, is yes. There is potential here. You can create a meaningful, different, and unique experience by changing the design of Dark Souls to accommodate a lower, more forgiving difficulty, and I'm sure there are many more ideas that I haven't even mentioned here. Difficulty is such a malleable, diverse design tool that its possibilities are limitless. Now, we're gonna tackle the much more complicated question. Should Dark Souls have an easy mode? Now, you're probably expecting me to conclude that yes, it should have an easy mode. I spent all this time brainstorming theoretical solutions, and I said that I would address the arguments against having it with my suggestions. However, you are also forgetting that I am a liar. I have spewed some falsehoods. Truth is, I haven't addressed all the arguments. Earlier, I said that games are designed with an unknown variable, the player. Well, that's not entirely correct. There are ways to control who plays your game. Games have target audiences. Design choices like genre, themes, setting, and of course, difficulty inform what that target audience is. And that audience is important. Here we encounter the other extreme of the player control dilemma I mentioned earlier. Since you have a specific target audience, why not just cater to them and offer only features and difficulty options relevant to that audience? If your game has a specific goal and a specific target audience, then your design should be very focused, streamlined, dedicated to that goal. If that's the case, difficulty options are useless. In his review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Tim Rogers of Action Button fame says this.
In summary, no, Dark Souls should not have an easy mode. No game should have a hard mode or an easy mode. The perfect video game will not need any difficulty modes. And that's the straight dope.
I'm not gonna try to speculate exactly what he meant by that. He will elaborate on it in future videos. But I want to explore this idea a bit, because I find it quite fascinating. There is an argument to be made about leaving the player completely out of the equation. Give them no control over the nature of the game. The inner workings and features of a game are meticulously designed, and the player should have no input over them, but simply experience them. There are definite advantages to this. Some of the best games ever are super focused in their design. They know what they are and what they want to do. Breath of the Wild manages to be a monument to player creativity despite, or maybe because of, having very clear and well-established rules of what Link can do, and how the world around him reacts to his actions. This, and the relatively static difficulty of Breath of the Wild, is a big reason why the player can be truly creative in how they play it. Games establish a relationship between them and the player, and difficulty is one of the biggest factors that determine the nature of that relationship. It determines the limits of what the player can do, and how the player will treat the game, and vice versa. Sometimes it can be straight up abusive. This relationship is one of the most important parts of any game, but a lot of the time it goes unnoticed because it's not explicitly stated. Pim is Online made an excellent video where they talk about the adversarial relationship Pathologic forms with the player. Man, I sure do quote a lot of videos in this one. Links in the description for all of them, by the way. Check them out. Pathologic is a masterclass in effective difficulty. It turns you into emotional pulp with how cruel and punishing it is. That relationship is the reason pretty much everyone who plays the damn thing makes it part of their personality. Pathologic doesn't offer difficulty options, and it should be obvious why. It knows what it wants to be, and difficulty options would go against that. Sometimes, what's omitted from a game tells you a lot more about its intentions than what is actually in it. Pathologic 2, though, is a different story. Pathologic 2 came out in 2019 and had a lot more eyes on it than the first game, and not all of the attention was positive. People complained that it's frustrating, cruel, tedious, not fun. If you're a fan of this game, the counter-argument is simple. Yeah, of course it's all of those things. That's the entire point. The people complaining about Pathologic 2 not being fun are simply not who the game is for. Despite this, the developers decided to include them. They added completely customizable difficulty. They realized that people don't try playing this game just to suffer. There's myriad of other reasons. Maybe they like the setting, the visuals, the characters, the story. Maybe it was a recommendation from a friend or a video essayist. People wanted to try this game out, and the developers trusted that whatever reasons they had for doing so are valid, and they didn't want to kick those people out. They are very transparent with their intentions. They tell you to your face that the game is meant to be almost unbearable. What an incredible thing to say to someone who paid money to play your game. Ice Pick Lodge trust their players, and I'm glad they included this in their game, but I can't argue in good faith that this is something Pathologic 2 needed. Caving to people who aren't your target audience isn't always a good idea. Even if customizable difficulty wasn't added, fans of the game wouldn't complain. The game achieves what it sets out to do and gives them, aka the target audience, exactly what they wanted. However, there aren't any real downsides to this feature. It's completely optional, and it includes more players, so more people play your game, which is almost always a good thing. Celeste is a challenging game. Its difficulty is crucial to its narrative. Yet it too doesn't shy away from extending a helping hand if you need it. Features like this are great. Inclusivity is good, but they're not absolutely necessary for these games. Despite not being necessary, Celeste had assist mode from day one, and it's a better game for it. Now, I don't think that all games should do this, or that Celeste or Pathologic 2 would be worse games if they didn't. That may seem contradictory, but remember that there's people behind these games, and designers who really care about their creative vision. Games are an art form, and I believe designers and developers should be able to impose whatever experience they want on the player, and the player should just deal with it, whether they like it or not. If you want to make the video game equivalent of the bald music teacher from Whiplash, go right ahead.
Well, that's okay, Charlie. That was alright. Good job.
It can be very frustrating to have to sacrifice your creative vision. As a game designer myself, I really understand their point of view. When I hear people complain that Dark Souls is too hard for them, a big part of me just wants to go, fuck them! Who cares what they think? They're not who the game was made for. Game developers deal with enough shit already, man. Expecting them to throw out their creative vision in order to please as many people as possible, many of whom wouldn't ever like their game for what it is or meant to be, is an unrealistic standard to hold them to. And players should not feel entitled to always ask for such things. That's why designers who have been willing to make this sacrifice for the sake of inclusivity must be commended. That's why I can't really say that Dark Souls should have an easy mode, especially since the main argument people cite for its inclusion, having an easy mode would make Dark Souls accessible, is a weak one. The important thing to understand is that making Dark Souls easy doesn't make it accessible. Dark Souls has many accessibility issues, and its lack of difficulty options is nowhere near its gravest sin. Difficulty options don't make a game accessible. Accessibility features do. And difficulty options is just one of them. Celeste is a challenging game, but it is accessible, and it's not just because of its assist mode. It allows you to change having to hold down the trigger to climb to a toggle. You can turn off flashing and screen shaking effects in case of photosensitivity. You can completely customize the controls. These don't lessen the challenge of Celeste in any way, but do wonders for accessibility. Difficulty and accessibility are not opposites of each other. Dark Souls doesn't have any of that. All of the options are display options, including the option to turn off the HUD, which I'm pretty sure is only useful for video essayists. So, thank you, Dark Souls 3. It feels so good to have my needs specifically considered and addressed. You should do it more. You don't make a game accessible simply by neutering its difficulty. There are games that are easy and inaccessible. In fact, you know what other game is horribly lacking in accessibility options? Animal Crossing. That's right, Animal Crossing is inaccessible just like Dark Souls. You heard it here first. Animal Crossing's lack of accessibility is less obvious, so it's not wrong to say that Animal Crossing is more accessible than Dark Souls. Nonetheless, both lack any of the accessibility features that are quickly becoming the standard now. The Dark Souls easy mode debate caused a lot of people to prioritize the wrong thing, in my opinion. No. Dark Souls doesn't need an easy mode. It could have it, and it would potentially offer a great alternative experience and include a lot of people. But what it truly needs, in order to meet the current standards of accessibility, are more varied and conventional accessibility features. You know these fuckers that wait in corners to ambush you? These enemies that like to sneak up on you from behind? Your only cues that they're coming is the sound they make. I was playing these games with a close friend of mine who has hearing problems, and because of how common sneak encounters like these are, he just couldn't enjoy it, and that made me sad. An option as simple as visual indicators for off-screen sounds would help him immensely to get through these games and have more fun with them. By the way, he's better at games than me. Fucker plays a mean Bowser in Smash. Point is, people who need accessibility features in order to play these games want the challenge. They know what they're signing up for, and are perfectly capable of overcoming whatever the game throws at them. They are gamers. All they need is for the game to be able to flex in order to accommodate their specific needs. Difficulty options are great, but if that's all you're offering in terms of accessibility, it's merely a brute force solution and it's not enough. Developers and designers should prioritize making their games playable for as many people as possible, rather than easier for those who already can. Now, I don't mean to imply that From Software were being malicious by not including these options. It's a general trend for games developed in Japan. They missed the accessibility memo or something. Dark Souls in particular, though, is an important case study because of one question that most seem to ignore in the easy mode debate, and that's, why Dark Souls? Part 7, why Dark Souls? Why this game? Why did this game spark this debate? And why are so many people obsessing over it specifically having an easy mode? The Soulsborne series is unique, in that it's one of the few big-budget games that are specifically designed to be difficult. Like I said, most games take the difficulty options approach, and since most people and game reviewers will just play the intended normal difficulty, the other difficulties are a bit more half-assed usually. This hurts the harder difficulties more, because designing a difficult game that's also fun and satisfying to play is, well, difficult. There's a definite appeal and market for difficult games, and a lot of indie games satisfy that itch. Games that either require or reward high mechanical skill. From Software is among the few big-budget companies who specialize in creating very challenging and very deliberately designed experiences. They are very good at what they do. From Software games also have a very particular kind of appeal that a lot of difficult games lack. They're not about requiring high mechanical skill from the beginning. They simply require patience and persistence. They're about trying the same challenge again and again, learning the tricks and rules it throws at you, and how to circumvent them. Once you learn their tricks, these games aren't difficult in the same way as other games that require skill and complicated or difficult inputs. Essentially, the message is that through sheer perseverance, anyone can overcome the challenges in these games. This may seem counterintuitive, but Dark Souls is quite beginner-friendly through the design of its early levels. I highly recommend watching Monty Zander's Nubis Humanus video on Dark Souls that demonstrates this very well. This is probably what I find the most counterintuitive aspect of the easy mode debate. It centers around a game series that isn't even that difficult in the first place. Dark Souls is more effectively difficult than it is mechanically difficult. It requires willpower and mental fortitude, not strict executions of inputs. Sekiro is much more mechanically complex and demanding than any of the Souls games. You cannot get through it without learning its very intricate kinks, and Celeste's later chapters will break your controller. Dark Souls even arguably has an easy mode. Summoning another player to help you snaps the difficulty like a twig. It's literally having another player do it for you, like when you were a kid and gave the controller to your big brother for the hard parts. By the way, I completely forgot about the online features because I don't use them, and they were pointed out to me when I asked about it on Twitter, follow me. It is not hard to make Dark Souls easy. In fact, Dark Souls' lack of mechanical difficulty is sort of becoming an issue for the dedicated players. If you look for mods for the Souls games and sort by most popular, you will find mods that make them harder, not easier. Point is, a large part of the appeal of Dark Souls is that anyone can beat it if they try and persist all the way through. Keyword being anyone. Having a game with this message be so inaccessible is very counterproductive. There's also the fact that the game's intent works both ways. If the feeling of finally standing triumphant over the boss that killed you so many times is exhilarating, the feeling of not being able to do it no matter how many times you try is equally devastating. It's no wonder that a game like this would have people asking for an easy mode, so they too could experience that satisfying feeling this series is famous for. Dark Souls offers a very specific kind of experience, and since you don't have any say in how difficult the game is, it's an experience that is for the most part shared by everyone who plays it. It found great success in this niche, and through that shared experience, Dark Souls has built a very dedicated community. For the most part, the community is also very welcoming to newcomers. Correct me if I'm wrong, or if in your experience the community is toxic, but to me it seems like a strange case where the community isn't the one gatekeeping people away from it. The game itself is. Dark Souls is undoubtedly one of the most beloved and talked about games in recent years, and maybe ever. Many people want to experience it and join the community of people who adore these games so much. Not to mention the social significance of difficulty I mentioned earlier. There's a definite stigma against playing games on easier difficulties, and easier games in general. This is especially true for people who have careers in the industry. Game journalists, reviewers, streamers, etc. I swear, if I hear another, they should include a game journal difficulty, I will eat the sun! The success of Dark Souls definitely contributed to that stigma. And that sucks! It's frustrating, I get it. I understand why the desire is there, but I think people are asking for the wrong thing. I have demonstrated that I think you can make an easy mode for these games that work well with their intent, and offer some sort of different value, and I think an inclusion of such a mode would be nice, and that if games trust their players and communicate their artistic intentions clearly to them, it wouldn't affect the game's design and popularity. However, due to Dark Souls' unique brand of difficulty, and the community it built with the meticulously designed experience it offers, I can't really prove that. Given their success and their intent, I think the decision not to include an easy mode was the correct one. There are good reasons not to include an easy mode, but there are no good reasons not to have accessibility options, especially for games like these, where it's perseverance and patience that is being tested rather than pure mechanical skill. The game industry is changing rapidly right now. Accessibility features in games are now becoming normalized. They are expected to be in most games, and that's great! Even indie studios, who often don't have the budget or expertise necessary to implement them easily, are making great innovations in this field, because they understand how important it is. I used Celeste as an example a lot in this video, for many reasons. It was rightfully praised for the leaps it made in accessibility at the time of its release, despite being a challenging game. However, It's important to understand that Celeste is by no means the end goal. It's just one step. Improvements can be made. Celeste came out in 2018, and since then, its assist mode had one update, a simple one. The text describing assist mode changed from saying that it's essential for Celeste to be difficult to intended to be difficult, framing it as just making it easier instead of offering accessibility options to those who need them was not ideal. The wording of the options matters. How you access the accessibility options matters. Props where props are due, The Last of Us Part 2 has truly bonkers levels of accessibility options, which opened the game up to so many people who could now enjoy it to the fullest and be forced to kill dogs. Games developed in Japan are still pretty behind on this. I hope they get the accessibility memo soon, although it's worth mentioning that Sekiro made some promising steps forward, allowing for full control remapping. I hope I managed to convince you with this video that difficulty in games is a fascinating topic, and there's a lot to cover when discussing it. As a design exercise, I highly recommend taking a game you enjoy playing and scrutinizing its difficulty. See how its design would change if you changed its difficulty and vice versa. It's such a diverse tool that you will get different results from two different games, and pretty much any game you pick you will find a rabbit hole to go down. It's important to know where its influence in design begins and where it ends. I think that with how accessibility is becoming more and more normalized and desired in games, this is something that game designers will have to consider a lot more going forward. And I want to see them make the best games and make them as difficult as they want and as accessible as they can. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, I truly love you. I pledge never to make a video as long as this one. I have a lot of people to thank and credit for helping me make this, so make sure to look at the description to see all of their links and all of the videos I referenced. Also, my Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon links will be in the description. If you really enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me on there or following me, and of course, like, comment, subscribe, YouTube stuff, whoa, yay, algorithm. Also, if you think I said something wrong, or incorrect, or insensitive in any way in the video, please feel free to tell me your thoughts and correct me in the comments. Did you like the little trick I pulled with the counter? How I bamboozled you all? You were expecting me to say difficulty and accessibility one more time, weren't you? Fuck!